All right, Joshua 20, let's call this one Refuge and maybe subtitle it Integrity, because this is a chapter where we are once again seeing things promised under Moses fulfilled under Joshua. Back in chapter 17, we saw how the daughters of Zelophehad had no brothers, and they remedied the injustice of potentially losing their inheritance by not having a brother to whom their father could pass the land to by appealing to Moses. Moses promised, and Joshua fulfilled that promise to make sure that they were not left out of the inheritance. Likewise, in this chapter, we are looking at the ways in which Moses promised cities of refuge to those who killed unintentionally, what we would call manslaughter. And that promise is being fulfilled under Joshua, as they are now assigning 6 cities throughout the 12 tribes that will give a person who is killed unintentionally an opportunity to flee until they can have their day in court, for lack of a better term. Why? Because the process laid out in this chapter says they present themselves to the elders of the city, at which point they will explain why they killed but did it without intent. The elders at that point are to take them in and give them refuge until the entire congregation can hear their case, during which time they're to be given a place safe from the avenger of blood. And in many ways, that is very similar to what we see in American jurisprudence and the whole concept of due process, where you have a pretrial hearing to determine what's going to happen to you until you can have your day in court. The same roughly 2-step process that we see here. But understand, there was still no refuge for the one who intentionally killed. They simply had to take their chances outside of the cities of refuge, ultimately until the avenger of blood could catch up with them. But understand how this is not simply a thing for the people of Israel, because the sojourners among them had equal protection under the law, meaning their lives weren't worth any less than the native-born citizens, since they could also find refuge in the cities of refuge. Likewise, if they were killed, there's no caveat that says an Israeli can get away for killing a sojourner. As a matter of fact, this is an extension of the law that says you are to have one law for both the sojourner and the native-born Israeli. And so we're seeing a number of concepts that we still cherish in the American legal system, also here in the earliest stages of Israel's formation as a nation, the formation of its courts. But Jesus is going to let us know in Matthew 18 that this isn't just for formal disputes, because informally, he's going to say the disputes between brothers are to be sorted out directly, one brother to another. And if that doesn't resolve it, it goes to 2 or 3 witnesses who can try to help them resolve the dispute. But if they still can't resolve it, it's supposed to go to the entire congregation. And if they still can't get along, they're simply to part ways peaceably, hoping that they can reconcile. But if they can't, agreeing to disagree, for lack of a better term. And in so doing, understanding that our criminal justice system is so similar to what we see here in Israel, never seems to be the case that God intended for his people to get more justice in the world or more due process in the world than they would get in the church. But to the degree we relax what God has designed for both his formal justice system and his informal dispute resolution system in the church, we run the risk of creating a situation where believers actually get less justice in the church than they do in the courts, to the degree we allow disputes to be resolved by innuendo and rumor and even backbiting. Understand, Paul talks about a similar situation in Romans 2 when he says the name of God is blasphemed among the non-believers to the degree they see that they can get more justice in the world than they can in the church. And so understand, in the churches of Christ, we are the restoration movement, in many ways trying to restore the forms of worship we see written in the Bible. But we have this question to resolve. If we are restoring the forms of worship without restoring the internal integrity, what have we actually done? Because as Paul has recognized, to the degree those who are outside of our assembly see that they can get more justice in the world than they can get in the church, what have we done to really demonstrate that what God has designed is actually good news? Which is why we say his best to you as you go forward in him. God willing, this time, restoring levels of integrity to our assembly that make it obvious not only to those in the church, but those outside of it, that they can expect greater levels of due process and trustworthiness and integrity in our assemblies than they can in the places they may be looking for it around them.